Welcome to the Greater Culture Podcast, where we have conversations about how to elevate the quality of life through movement, nutrition, recovery, and mindset practices. Welcome back to another episode of the Greater Culture Podcast with your host, Brad Marshall. Excited today to be joined by the one and only Jason Ackerman. I'm glad that the making you all feel guilty over there has paid off, got you and Fern both to be guests on the podcast. So thanks for spending some time with me today.
Guilt is a great motivator.
It is for everybody, right? One of the things that I always love hearing from folks is understanding a little bit more about their story and their journey. I think you've done so much in the health and fitness space, from running gyms to now running a company of helping gym owners. So give us sort of the high level chapters you would say that kind of map out your story or your life and what kind of chapter you're in right now.
Oh, all right. Just chapters. Let's do it. Chapter 1 would be, let's have like the origin story.
There we go. Yep.
Origin story would be like middle school got a little chunky. Right? Like, all right. And then chapter 1, like that's like prologue.
Mm-hmm.
Chapter 1 would be, started wrestling freshman year in high school. Marcus asked us on a team call a couple weeks ago for best hour, like, what's the best piece of advice you ever got? And mine was, you got to start wrestling. Right? Like, everybody had these like profound statements, hard work pays off, and talent, etc. And I was like, you got to wrestle, because like that was advice, right? That one piece of advice changed the entire trajectory of my life. I'd probably be far more successful, a few inches taller, right? But overweight if I didn't start wrestling. So started wrestling, and then I would say found bodybuilding would be like chapter 2. Then there'd be, like, okay, so that's like how I got into fitness, and then probably chapter 3 would be like my first job outside of like I was a busboy and a waiter, was at a gym called Club Fit in Jefferson Valley, where I just fell in love with personal training. And then there was like the dark period, 2000 to 2007. So that's really like the lull in this story. Like, and this is where I was just grinding as a trainer, like teaching spin. I was taking every certification from, spin and plyometrics and cardio kickboxing and all the yogas. I had a yoga studio for a brief period of time. And then it would be like the CrossFit chapter, 2007 and beyond. And then, probably like, I would then say like the 2014-ish chapter would be like entrepreneurial. How's that?
Yeah.
Is that
I like that. I like the chapters. What's interesting about that is the inflection points. You look at any story, whether it's story brand of like you meet the hero, you get to know the hero, then there's the challenge and like who's the guy that comes along and saves it. And so for you, one of the inflection points was that first wrestling piece, and that it still has stuck with you to this day. So what was it about that chapter of wrestling that set you on a trajectory that who would have known this many years later, like you're still working towards?
Yeah, I think there's two things about it. One, wrestling just really got me into fitness, right? So I started wrestling in 9th grade, 1993, I believe, 92 or 93, whatever year that I was a freshman in high school, because my earth science teacher / coach, Mr. Ortega, literally day one walked in, probably 4'11" at the time, chunky, but like 80 pounds. And he's like, you're wrestling. So it was just like that. I got my butt kicked for a year. Like, not like, I got like butt kicked every single day. And I was like, I need to get stronger. Like, and that's when I joined the gym for the first time, like in March or April after the season ended. So it was really that of like the fitness journey. But then I do think a lot of the lessons you learn on wrestling mats, like I think, like you mentioned before we hit record, about consistency and, the idea of hard work pays off, and the idea of like suffering. All of those were lessons that I think as a teenager, you don't realize you're learning, but you're learning. So it was like twofold, like this passion for fitness that started there, but also this mentality of like, you're going to have to kill me type of mentality, right? And whatever I'm doing.
Yeah, but what I hear from that is this idea of grit. When you look at the concept, it's passion mixed with perseverance of like, you got to care about whatever it is you're doing. And then you have to have the discipline to stay in it, knowing that there might be some delayed gratification there. So even at that age, learning about what that looks like. what that sounds like. And it's funny that you mentioned, consistency, because I think it's something that I know I've heard others who are close to you have said is regardless of what's going on in your life, like you keep showing up, regardless of whatever challenges and struggles, like you keep hitting play, you keep showing up. Was that at that point in time in your life where you learned that skill or that ability to just keep showing up?
I think accidentally, because I think looking back, I just didn't know any better. It was this. I signed up for this thing, and I mean, 30 minutes into my first practice, I was like, "This is not for me," right? But I was like, "But I signed up." Right? I think you could be foolish, right? Like I wouldn't say I wanted to quit on day one, but there were certainly periods every season that I was like, I'm done. Like whether it was I'm done getting my butt kicked, or when I finally got good and was winning, but I'm cutting weight, I'm like, I'm done cutting weight, or I'm done sacrificing all the things my friends are doing because I can't go out on a Friday because we have a tournament, like those things. So I think there was accidentally, yes, learning like this idea of commitment, and you signed your name here and now this is your thing.
And how did that serve you in the chapter where you mentioned for 5 years, being a fitness
Yeah,
trainer, yoga studio, all of that? Because when somebody hears like 5 years of
it was
grinding,
7 years.
7 years, when someone
Dude,
hears 7 years, yeah, what is that like?
so it was, essentially I graduated college in 2000, and I went to if you're familiar with the SUNY system in New York, it was upstate New York, but a lot of the people come in from like Long Island and Manhattan, and they were all going back home, and this is like the financial boom. Like they're literally leaving college making six figures in 2000. And here I was at Gold's. I was making $15 if someone paid for a $40 personal training session. But I was just like, I do not want to go home. Part of it, like, I did have a girlfriend, and we were like, moderately serious. I was like, I'm not leaving her. Like, she lives in Albany. So, but I just, I don't think at that point I knew I was like, I'm never leaving fitness. I think in the back of my mind, I was like, I'll get a job at some point, but I had this psych degree that essentially you could do nothing with. So during that 7 year period, I also got a master's because I was like, I'm gonna have to get a job. I not only got a master's, but I've not said often is I went back to a community college to get all the credits I need to be a phys ed teacher. With a psych degree, you could be a teacher, but you couldn't be a phys ed teacher without like badminton. Like I'm
Hmm.
like 23 playing badminton with like 17-year-olds and like doing all those classes, but I got all the credits I needed for phys ed, and then I got my master's so I could do like a little bit of variety. And but it was just like, I mean, to answer your question also, it's like I needed to pay the bills. Like I was not living at home. So the year I graduated college, I found an apartment for $475, all included, like electric, because it was the basement of someone's house. So it's like they couldn't separate the meters and whatnot. But let me tell you, Brad, you would not have been able to come into my apartment because you literally had to be under 5'5" to fit in there. Like luckily my girlfriend was tiny too, but I remember my buddy from college came to visit, and Nick. He was like, I can't stand up in your apartment, like so. And it was Brad. I think I've mentioned this. It was like the ghetto, like so. There's this dude. I say dude. I don't want to get canceled on this podcast, but it was a man that used to dress like a woman, but he put no effort in. He was just wearing women's clothes. I'm like, dude, you're not even trying to look pretty. Like you're just like wearing a dress. And he would like just be next door. Like he'd come on like, and then I've told you the times like my car stereo got stolen enough times. I stopped fixing the window, so it was bad. But it's like I need to work to pay the bills, and eventually 2 or 3 years of that, like my girlfriend and I moved in, so we were able to split our expenses and get a nicer apartment. But yeah, I was just like trying to survive. It was like literally like 7 years of survival. And I was like, so I finished my master's. I was like, all right, I guess I got to start putting in applications to be a teacher. And then I literally, I swear, like divine intervention. My buddy's like, you heard of this CrossFit thing? That was it.
It's fascinating to me how many times we hear that story of I was the last person you would ever imagine to have gotten into CrossFit or to started it or to open a gym or whatever it is. And yet it still has become a livelihood for so many folks after they've found that. When your buddy introduced you to CrossFit, did you still have that thought of I probably need to be a teacher, or I need to go get a 9 to 5, or I need to go do something else? Or was CrossFit the turning point where you're like, I think I can actually make something out of this
No,
fitness passion?
yeah, it was like immediate because I was like, I didn't actually want to be a teacher. It was like, I like was like, I can't. I was literally waking up at 4 a.m. and I would take a client till like 8 or 9 p.m. Just like it was like if someone was willing to pay me, or I was driving, in the from like Albany to Bethlehem to Slingerland to get like piecing just different things together every day, and I was dying, and I didn't want, but I still loved it. I just hated that I was like, this is not sustainable. So when he showed me CrossFit, my buddy Chad R, I'll never forget him. We were at jujitsu. It was a Saturday afternoon. Hands me the magazine, Muscle and Fitness. Go home, check out, .com. But I was like, oh, I think I can get everyone. It was like what Glassman said, like I could get them all together. I could do it in one spot. And then I had a client named Barry, and I was like, Barry, help me find a place. And I never forget. I remember because we're on an incline bench. I'm like, there's like a lip on it, so I'm like above him, spotting him on the incline. And he's a real estate agent. I was like, Barry, you gotta help me find a place to open this CrossFit thing. And he's like, no. I was like, what do you mean? And he was like, we're in the court club. He was like, go ask the owner, Shy. His name was, who owns Albany CrossFit now, if you can go rent one of those courts that no one's using. And I was like, all right. Literally handshake and we're good to go.
The old days of CrossFit is wild too. When you hear that of what it took to start a gym, it wasn't very much in terms of financial investment, and a lot of passion took you a long way. Do you still get the sense that today it's the same, or do you think that it requires a lot more out of the person who's going to open the gym now than maybe it did back when you did?
Yeah, I think it'd be a little foolish to say you can start the way I did. I mean, if you go back, I mean, there's a picture on my Instagram today or yesterday of like me with that long hair, like in the original box. Like we're clearly on a racquetball court. Like it doesn't look like we're like that was before. Like that was like day three. Like that was really early on. I think like anything, it's got even the podcast, right? Like this, like you look professional. You have headphones. Like, could you start a podcast with nothing? Yes. Are you going to be way further ahead if you show up with a good mic and audio and all that? Yes. Right. Like, it'd be hard to start. I would venture to say I started with less than $5,000.
Mhm.
Right, and that was probably the first month's rent of eight. I remember it was $850. Mostly, I mean, it was before Rogue, so it was like the piping from Home Depot, bad matting. Yeah, maybe 6 or 7 thousand, but not much more than that.
Mhm. And when you reflect back on those times compared to even where you're at now, you mentioned that there was the CrossFit phase, and then you entered into entrepreneurial phase, as almost they were slightly different. I'd be curious to hear what that journey was like, because you open the box, you get an opportunity to run that gym. I know you've run multiple gyms over that time period. Now having transitioned into a role of mentoring and guiding and sharing information with others, talk to us about what that journey was like, of going from helping the individuals with health and fitness to now helping business owners run and manage more effective brands and businesses.
Well, yeah, and you're right. Like, and I think to a fault, as CrossFit affiliate owners, we don't consider ourselves entrepreneurs. I don't remember. I was talking about it the other day to somebody. I was like, when I opened my gym, the idea that I would ever have another coach was like not only foreign, like it was non-existent. I never was like, and one day there'll be more coaches. It was like I can coach 8 hours a day, and that's less than I'm doing. So it was never like I'm an entrepreneur now. It was like I've just found an easier way to do this thing, right? Like because I suppose even to be technical as a trainer, I was an entrepreneur, right? Like I didn't. I mean, I might have had like supervisors at different, but I was essentially piecing my own livelihood together. Um, so I think because of that, I just learned so much. I just learned mostly what not to do. So it's easy to coach people like, well, don't do this because that didn't work, or that worked, but it was not the easy way to do it. I think just going through it's no different than as a CrossFit coach. If I do the workout, I'm going to give you a much better whiteboard brief than had I never done it. Because I'm like, oh, this is how I did it. Here's where I made a mistake. Here's where I would have went a little faster. Right. Here's where I would have taken a breath before starting the next set. So you just learn everything by doing.
One of the things I'm curious of, would you say that there's a point in time where you loved the business side of entrepreneurship? Because I think you're a fan of Hormozy, and it's something that he preaches about. Is we get really excited about brands, we get passionate about doing the thing, but being able to fall in love with the business side of it more so than just the coaching of the classes and this and that. Would you say there was a moment in your entrepreneurial journey where you realized, like, I actually really love the business side beyond just helping people improve in whatever the domain is for them?
Yeah, it was probably 2011. I had a full time staff at that point, and I loved just leadership and helping them get better, and also realizing the more of them, the more we can impact. And that's when we had a second box. So it was really fun to work on all that business of just how are we going to expand market. We were doing radio ads, we were doing all sorts of like showing up grassroots like farmers market type things, or health fairs. That type of stuff was really really enjoyable, and it still is. And yeah, now I think I love coaching CrossFit coaches, but my wife's a photographer. I love helping her with her business. Or we have an au pair who's trying to get involved in like yoga and meditation. Like I just love the idea of business mentorship.
Mm. And would you say that that's something you've had like all along, or is that something that kind of developed more so over time? Because I'm kind of curious about this idea of entrepreneurship. Like, is it something that's kind of like instinctual? You're kind of born with it, and you see it in others. Some have it, some don't. Anyone can learn it. What's kind of your take on that?
I think recently, so Fern and I were together in San Diego, and we were recording some podcasts. And he goes, he said something like, "I'm so glad you're lazy," and I was like, "Okay, can we talk about this?" And he's like, "Because we need lazy people." And he used the word lazy, and Fern would never admit it, but I don't think he thinks I'm lazy. But it's kind of like water. He knows I will just find the path of least resistance. And then coincidentally, my parents came to visit the very next week, and my stepmother and I were talking, and I was like, "What's the difference between me and my sisters? My older sister Corey, my younger sister Carly." And she was like, "Corey essentially was lazy and didn't want to do any work." She's like, "Carly will, do whatever it takes to be the best of the best, but she will do it to a detriment of her health." And she was like, "You always find the easy way." And I was like, "So interesting that both of you said, like, two people that know me the best in this world, my stepmother and Fern, right, said the same thing." And I think to me, entrepreneurship was like the easy way through life. That's what it was. Like I was like, oh, I definitely don't want a job. I cannot have a boss. So if I can't have a boss, what can I do? Well, I got to do this thing. And that's what, like I said, even in 2000 when I was grinding, I would remind myself, I'm like, all my friends with those six figures, they're showing up at an office. Here I am on a bike, like teaching spin, listening to Dave Matthews, right? Like, I was like, but I was like, I'm in control. Like, I don't think you need to own a business to be an entrepreneur. I just think you need to say, like, I'm responsible for me. And you can have a 9 to 5 and take that same approach. But, like, you're a great example, right? Like, you have a career, but you're like, okay, but I'm doing this thing because I'm responsible for me. And I do want some control over my life. So that was just, like I said, my way of finding the easy path through life.
Mhm.
Although it's not the easy path.
Yeah, and it's funny that you say that because it's kind of like choose your hard, choose your easy, I suppose, as well. That you've always had the mentality and mindset of wanting to work for yourself, regardless of what it took to get there, and finding the different paths that allowed you to do that. And it's funny when you said, like, right away, CrossFit was one that you're like, I can figure this out. This is going to help me work for myself, not have a boss, make it happen. And it sounds like that continues to happen again and again. And we talked about this thing of consistency and continually showing up. And what's fascinating to think about you is some might say polarizing, some would say consistent on social media, but what has it been like in terms of building a presence and sharing your insights and what that's looked like over the years? Because when it comes to folks in the CrossFit space who are continuously sharing their ideas around what a class should look like, what fitness should look like, what coaches can look like, you're one who comes up. And what you share with others. So what's that process been like for you?
I don't know why anybody cares what I have to say. It's just it's like a diary essentially out there. And when you've been involved in fitness for 30 years, you have a lot of stories and context and to pull from. But I'm essentially sharing my thoughts and opinions, some things that worked, some things that didn't. So yes, you use the term polarizing. I don't think I'm polarizing, because if you don't like it, turn the other cheek, right? Like it's. I'm not suggesting this is the only way ever. It's like, here's what I do. Here's what I think works. Here's what I think. No, no, no big deal if you agree or disagree.
Mhm.
But you just continue to continue to post.
One of the things that comes to mind, especially for me, is this idea of consumer versus creator. And I think when we're in that learning phase, which, we're all the time, there's so much content out there to consume now, whether it's podcasts and books and articles and development programs, and we can constantly consume. Is there a turning point where, as an entrepreneur or as somebody who has a business and a brand, it is helpful and meaningful to turn into creator, to be able to share what it is you do, how you can help people, what that looks like? Have you noticed anything in regards to that for you, of like finding that balance between continually learning and growing and consuming, but also sharing what it is that you said, like your diary and what your thoughts are and how you can impact others?
No, I think if you're trying to grow a business, you need to share, like you say. You need to create and show people that. Whether it's to get people in the doors of your box, you need to show some stuff, whether it's to get them to listen to your podcast or to sign up for mentorship. They need to know you're a real person with real ideas and real thoughts. That said, it's a slippery slope to consume. Like, I don't keep Instagram on my phone. Like, people think I'm ignoring them. I just don't have it. I post and that's it. Like, I'll look a little bit here and there, and I'll tell you, like, if you're it's pretty obvious when someone's just a dummy on the internet, right? Like, I'm not gonna. And then they get mad, like, "How dare you not respond?" I'm like, "You don't understand how this works. There's no contract that said I have to respond to every dumb comment on here. You can argue all you want. Like, recently there's people arguing about the RX and RX Plus. I'm like, who cares? Don't do it if you don't like it.
You're,
Everybody finds a reason to defend their own belief system.
Yeah, and one of the things I think that I've certainly seen and learned is that if you're putting stuff out there and it aligns with what your thoughts and your opinions are, you're going to get people to buy in and say, "Hey, I like what he has to say." I remember a number of years ago when you and Fern were just throwing podcasts out there, to be like, "I like what they're having to say about coaching. Let me check it out." And next thing you know, 3-4 years later, it's like still listening, learning, engaging with what you all are creating, what you've done with Best Hour. And so I think it is important for folks out there with a brand to figure out, like, what is your voice? What do you stand for? What are you about? Because people got to know what you're about if they want to subscribe to your brand or join your box or sign up for what you're doing.
Yeah, and it helps when it's authentic. Like, we
Mm-hmm.
20 years later, I'm still doing CrossFit. I go to the box across the street, show up, throw down. Like, I'm not telling people this is the path and then not doing it. And also, when it comes to the internet, you do have to be somewhat polarizing. I don't do it by saying like outlandish things,
Mm-mm.
but I think if you don't take a stance, if, like, let's say, if you're like, hey, I think it'd be good to eat meats and vegetables, nuts, seeds, little starch, right? However, if you don't want to, that's okay. Like, no one cares, right? But if you're like, you have to like draw, you have to get someone's attention, good and bad. And it just so happens the people that disagree tend to comment more. Simply looking at numbers, like, if a post has 1,000 likes and 10 people commenting negative, I know it was still well received.
It's going
Ten
to show up on a
people
lot of people's feeds.
Right, but just like 10 people,
Yep.
the vocal minority does not outweigh, 1,000 people actually thought that was a good thought or
Mm-hmm.
agreed with it. And maybe they'll save it for later, whatever it looks like.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's been, quite the journey as you look at the different chapters, and I'm excited to see how this chapter continues to unfold. And so I've got one more question for you, one that I love asking folks. I know you're big on values and principles and things that guide you. You know, people have said about you, you find the easy way, but you're also consistent and keep hitting play and showing up. So, what would you say are the principles, values, or what guides you and influences how you continue to show up and interact with others and how you show up for your family and whatnot?
I mean, this will be super cliche, but I've really, one of the books I've read a couple of times, and I talked to my 3-year-old daughter about it. She knows. I always say, "What's the rule?" She says, "Always do your best." And I really think like that's what it comes down to. And I think about whatever I'm doing, am I doing my best right now? But she's attitude. I said, "Hey, what is the rule?" She said, "Always do your best. We don't pick our nose and we don't eat our boogers." I was like, "Those are good rules too." And I said, technically, if you're doing your best, you're not eating your boogers. But I like that you differentiate. I don't know how she got to those. Like, I must have told her that at some point, which I stand by. Don't eat your boogers. But she will always say, because I take her to jujitsu once a week, and she's 3. I don't think she knows quite what her best is. Like, did you do your best? And she'll say yeah. And then like whatever we're doing, I'm like, are you doing your best right now? So that's what I think about, and being a integral part of the team. Like that's it. Like whether it's my wife and kids, whether it's Fern and Marcus in the team, Fern likes to joke like, don't there should never be any slack coming. Like if we're did he give you this analogy? Did he tell you
Mm-mm.
this one? He said like, if there's dogs pulling a sled, I don't want yours to have any slack. And I think the cool thing about us as a team is we realize we all have our different strengths. We all have different skills. We all have different needs for time to put in the work, time to relax, and but none of us are ever allowing any slack in the lead.
I love it. That idea of doing your best, being part of the team, pulling your weight so there's no slack. And it makes sense why, after all these years, still in it, still grinding, still helping others to pull the slack out and do their best as well. So, Jason, with that, thanks so much for spending some time with me on the podcast. It's been great getting to know you and the fellows over the last number of years, and appreciate all the support you've given Greater Culture and helped us in our journey as well. And look forward to the next time we get to connect.
Thanks, Brad.